Frédéric Vasseur kicks Lewis Hamilton out after he said he felt useless at Ferrari. Want to know the main reasons? Want to know why this news hasn't come to light yet? Then this video is for you. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Hamilton didn't linger in the paddock after the race. He didn't stick around for the debrief. He didn't go through the motions of pleasantries or shake hands with engineers. Instead, he marched directly to the Ferrari motorhome, still in his race suit, visor up, helmet clutched tight to his chest like a symbol of war. No cameras caught what came next, but the walls were thin enough, and the staff tense enough, that within minutes, a wave of murmurs had spread across every hospitality suite from Alpine to Red Bull. Multiple sources inside the team have confirmed that Hamilton's voice could be heard from the far end of the corridor, rising over the quiet murmurs of the post-race analysis. What began as frustration soon escalated into fury. He didn't address just one person. He targeted the entire technical leadership of Ferrari. He demanded answers, not pleasantries. He pointed fingers, not for theatrics, but because he believed something fundamental had gone wrong. And not just with the car. Witnesses say the tirade was unlike anything they'd seen in Maranello colors. Hamilton, usually composed and diplomatic, was now raw and explosive, calling out a fundamental lack of accountability in the team's development structure. He referenced briefings from earlier in the season that had promised significant aerodynamic upgrades by Melbourne, none of which had materialized in any effective form. He questioned why the simulator data never matched reality. He demanded to know why every weekend began with hope and ended with apologies. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. Even Charles Leclerc, sitting quietly in the debrief room with his arms crossed and a towel around his neck, was pulled into the confrontation, not because he'd done anything wrong, but because Hamilton needed to make a point. "Look at him," Hamilton reportedly said, gesturing toward Leclerc. "He's driving on instinct because he grew up with this car. He doesn't even feel the imbalance the same way I do. But that doesn't mean the imbalance isn't there. You've built a machine that only works for one driver. That's not how you win championships. That's how you win races, if you're lucky." The atmosphere was so charged, so dense with tension, that team principal Frédéric Vasseur had to physically step in, calm the room, and request everyone take a break. But by then, the damage had already been done, not just to morale, but to trust. Hamilton's words weren't just angry, they were true. They cut deep because they revealed the underlying fractures no one had dared speak of out loud. The week that followed wasn't about damage control, it was about containment. Every journalist sniffed the air around Ferrari, and every insider suddenly went quiet. Press conferences were filled with scripted lines. Leclerc dodged questions. Vasseur brushed off tensions as normal heat-of-the-moment emotions. But inside the team, a schism had begun to form. Technicians began splitting into camps, those who supported Hamilton's assessment and believed the car was being developed in a one-dimensional way, and those who believed he was struggling to adapt to the nuances of Ferrari's setup philosophy. Meetings grew longer. Sim sessions were rescheduled. Leclerc, meanwhile, kept putting the car on the front row, but even his tone in interviews changed. Less exuberant, more cautious, as if sensing the tectonic shift beneath the surface. Then came the internal leak. A classified report from Ferrari's engineering team, meant only for top-tier technical staff and senior leadership, was mysteriously shared with a select few figures in the F1 media sphere. Though never confirmed officially, excerpts began appearing in anonymous forum posts and encrypted social media threads, claiming that the team's new aero package had been fast-tracked without full validation. Data showed a significant downforce imbalance in mid-speed corners and an unpredictable rear-end response under load transitions, particularly problematic for Hamilton's smoother, momentum-based driving style. Subscribe to stay informed about the latest Formula One news. It wasn't just a setup issue. It was a fundamental flaw. One that had been downplayed internally for fear of admitting the new concept was failing. By the time the paddock arrived in Suzuka, the mood around Ferrari was unrecognizable. Hamilton's team wore fixed expressions, tight-lipped and reserved. His performance on track was again subpar. He qualified 8th, finished 7th, and looked utterly defeated in post-race media. No explosive comments this time, just a chilling resignation in his voice. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Hamilton's management team had already begun activating contingency strategies. Meetings were requested with Audi, with Aston Martin, with McLaren. Not because a switch was imminent, but because the silence from Ferrari's upper management was deafening. No apology. No plan. No admission. Nothing. The trust was gone. And in Formula One, once trust is gone, everything else crumbles. This wasn't just a crisis of performance. It was a crisis of philosophy. Ferrari had promised Hamilton a winning machine, a legacy-defining final chapter to his illustrious career. But what they had delivered was a flawed vehicle paired with institutional reluctance to admit mistakes, and a culture seemingly more focused on optics than truth. Internally, Leclerc was growing uncomfortable with his role as the silent beneficiary. He knew the car wasn't perfect. He could feel the nervousness of the rear, the strange drag levels on the straights. But he also knew that questioning the team's direction would only further destabilize a structure already on the brink. His silence wasn't complicity, it was survival. But survival only lasts so long. As the F1 calendar marches forward and the European leg looms, Hamilton's story at Ferrari is approaching an inflection point. If results don't improve, if internal culture doesn't shift, and if voices like Hamilton's continue to be ignored, the outcome may not be dramatic, it may be quiet. A whispered departure. A mutual agreement to part ways. A legendary name walking away from a legendary team, not with fanfare, but with a bitter shrug. Because sometimes, the loudest moment isn't an outburst, it's the silence that follows. The moment Lewis Hamilton stepped back into the Ferrari hospitality suite, still clad in his fireproof race gear, his face was unreadable, void of triumph, stripped of hope, and shadowed by the weight of frustration that had been boiling beneath the surface for months. The sweat on his brow hadn't dried, and yet the emotional storm within him had only just begun to erupt. Around him, engineers avoided eye contact. Staff members whispered behind coffee cups. Mechanics stared into nothing. The air was thick with anxiety, with disbelief, with the kind of tension that could snap a steel beam in half. Then, without warning, the door burst open. Frédéric Vasseur entered like a thunderclap, his presence seething with fury, his expression a volatile mixture of betrayal, disbelief, and unfiltered rage. He didn't walk in, he stormed, like a man who had been pushed too far, too many times, and had just watched the carefully constructed illusion of unity disintegrate on live television. The door slammed shut behind him, rattling the walls, sending a jolt through everyone outside the room. Conversations halted. Breaths were held. Silence took hold like a chokehold around the heart of the suite. "You want to explain that little stunt, Lewis?" Vasseur's voice was thunder, low, heavy, laced with venom. "Because from where I'm standing, it looked like you just lit a match and dropped it into a room full of gasoline." Hamilton didn't move. He didn't blink. He stood still, body taut, water bottle trembling slightly in his grip, jaw clenched, eyes locked on a point somewhere far beyond the walls of the suite, as if he were looking not at Vasseur, but at everything that had led him to this precise moment of combustion. "I told them what they needed to hear," he said, his voice hoarse but resolute. "I told them what no one else around here has had the guts to say." Vasseur's face darkened, a vein in his temple throbbing visibly. He stepped closer, not walking but advancing like a predator, his polished shoes barely making a sound against the cold tile floor, the distance between them shrinking to inches. "Guts." Vasseur growled, practically spitting the word. "You think that was courage? That was cowardice, Hamilton. That was self-preservation disguised as honesty. That was you throwing your entire team under the bus in front of the world because you're not getting the results you expected. You think that's leadership?" Hamilton straightened his back, his expression hardening into something colder, something forged in the fires of criticism and disappointment. The seven-time world champion wasn't new to pressure. He wasn't unfamiliar with internal warfare, with politics behind paddock doors, or with the unrelenting expectations that came with wearing red. But this was personal. And it stung. "What's not leadership," Lewis responded, voice steady but dangerous, "is watching the same mistakes happen over and over and pretending everything's fine. What's not leadership is acting like we're progressing when we're not. We're lost, Fred. And you know it. I just had the balls to say it out loud." Vasseur let out a bitter, disbelieving laugh, one that didn't reach his eyes. His anger was no longer a wildfire. It had evolved into something colder, more dangerous. A glacier of contempt. "You know what I see, Lewis," he said, his voice now quieter, but far more lethal. "I see a legend who thought he'd walk into Ferrari and rewrite history. I see a man who expected to be adored, handed glory, anointed as the Messiah of Maranello. And now that the path isn't golden, now that it's uphill and brutal and messy, you're cracking. You're turning on the people fighting tooth and nail for you behind the scenes. Hamilton's silence spoke volumes. His eyes narrowed, the storm behind them visible but controlled, like a dam at the brink of collapse. He took a slow breath, not to calm himself, but to contain the eruption threatening to spill out in words he might not be able to take back. "I didn't come here to be worshipped," he said eventually, each word laced with disappointment rather than anger. "I came here to build something. But you can't build anything on denial. You can't move forward if you won't even admit there's a problem." Vasseur's fist slammed down onto the table beside them, sending the bottle flying and causing a sharp metallic clatter that turned every head outside the room. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the tense air. "And you think calling out the team in front of the media is how we fix that?" he shouted. "Do you have any idea what you've just done to morale? To unity? You didn't just speak your truth. You undermined the entire organization. You painted us all as incompetent. And worst of all, you gave our rivals ammunition." Hamilton's lips twitched, somewhere between a frown and a smirk, bitterness creeping into his tone. "Our rivals already know. They watch the races. They see the data. You think Red Bull and Mercedes aren't laughing at us already? You think pretending everything's fine is protecting us from ridicule?" Vasseur's face went pale, not with fear, but with the fury of someone who had just been slapped with a truth they refused to acknowledge. "You've been slow," Vasseur hissed, stepping even closer, now so close their noses were nearly touching. "You've been disconnected, detached, uninspired. Charles is out driving you every weekend, in the same machinery. He's pushing. He's adapting. He's bleeding red. And you? You look like you're waiting for someone to rescue you." The words sliced deep, sharper than any criticism Hamilton had faced from media, fans, or former rivals. These came from inside. From the man who had fought to bring him to Ferrari. From someone who was supposed to have his back. Hamilton's nostrils flared. His voice, when it came, was quieter than before, but infinitely more dangerous. "Don't mistake silence for weakness, Fred. I've been patient. I've been loyal. I've taken hit after hit without saying a word. But there comes a point where silence becomes complicity. And I won't be complicit in failure." The silence that followed was apocalyptic. A chasm opened between them, not of words, but of trust, of vision, of belief. And in that moment, both men knew something had cracked, something not easily repaired by PR statements or behind closed doors apologies. Outside the hospitality suite, no one moved. No one breathed. Because everyone knew, Ferrari wasn't just fighting for a championship. It was fighting to survive its own implosion. And the war had just begun. That word. That single, razor-edged word detonated in the silence like a grenade. Soft. It wasn't just an insult. It was a challenge, a provocation, an open wound torn wide in front of the man who had built his entire identity on steel, resilience, and fire. Lewis didn't blink. He didn't flinch. But his posture changed. Shoulders back. Spine straight. Jaw clenched so tight you could almost hear the tension crack. The atmosphere in the room shifted, like gravity had increased by tenfold. It wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. The kind of silence that drips with the threat of what's coming next. "Soft?" he echoed, voice barely above a whisper, yet laced with a venom that could paralyze. It wasn't a question. It was a warning. A prelude. A fuse lit. Vasseur didn't back down. His eyes locked with Lewis's like two predators circling the same territory. No fear. No hesitation. Just raw defiance. "You've lost the fire," the Ferrari boss snapped, each syllable hurled like a dagger. "You think presence is enough. That walking into the paddock with your name stitched on the fireproofs entitles you to greatness. But this isn't about legacy. Not here. Not at Ferrari. This team doesn't kneel to past glories. You don't inherit wins, you earn them. And right now, you're not earning anything. You're not fighting. You're sulking. You're whining." The words landed like hammer blows. But Lewis didn't stagger. He didn't look away. If anything, he stepped closer, erasing the space between them until their faces were so near, the tension between them could be cut with a knife. His fists were clenched, veins rippling beneath skin that had known the heat of countless battles. His breath came slow, deliberate, as if wrestling back a storm that threatened to erupt. "I've bled for this sport," he said, voice low, ragged with fury restrained by sheer willpower. "I've given everything to racing. I've carried machines held together with duct tape and prayer into battles they were never built to win. I've taken cars that should have died on the circuit and put them on podiums. I've stood alone against storms, against odds no one else dared face. And I did it not for applause, not for records, but because I refused to lose." He took another step forward. His words grew colder, sharper. "You think this is about coasting? About living off the past? I don't sleep at night because I replay every corner, every pit call, every tenth I couldn't claw back. And now I'm in this car, the red one you keep calling a machine worthy of champions, but it doesn't respond. It doesn't listen. I drive with everything I have, and it gives me nothing. Nothing but understeer, unpredictability, and heartbreak." He paused. Not for drama, but because emotion had lodged itself in his throat, uninvited and undeniable. "You want fire," he growled. "I'm burning alive in here. Every time I see that red flag on my chest and I know I'm not delivering, it eats me alive. But don't you ever question my fight. Because if you think I'm done, you're not watching close enough. You want a warrior? You're looking at one." Vasseur held his ground, but something shifted in his expression. A flicker. Uncertainty? Regret? Respect? It was hard to tell. But the silence that followed wasn't the same. It wasn't explosive anymore. It was heavier. Charged. The kind of silence that signals a storm isn't over, it's just begun. No one moved. No one dared breathe. And just like that, a new war had ignited inside the scarlet walls of Maranello. A war not just of results, but of will. A war between a legend desperate to resurrect the glory he once knew, and a team unwilling to wait for him to catch up. Lewis Hamilton stood there frozen, the words slicing through the thick Maranello air like razors. His breath caught somewhere between disbelief and rage, his jaw clenched, fists trembling slightly at his sides. The office, once a space of strategy and collaboration, now felt like a courtroom, and Frederick Vasseur had just dropped the verdict with all the finality of a judge's gavel. "No, Lewis," Vasseur had said, his tone calm but seething with controlled fury, each syllable laced with disappointment, frustration, and something worse, contempt. "I don't think you hate it enough. Because if you did, you'd stop whining and start leading. Right now, Charles is leading. You're sinking." The echo of those words didn't just hang in the air, it buried itself deep in Hamilton's chest like a dagger. There were no cameras, no team personnel to buffer the blow. Just two men locked in a psychological war that had been brewing for months. This wasn't just about racing anymore. This was a philosophical divorce, an emotional civil war inside the Scuderia. Both men stared at each other like wounded lions, each too proud to back down, their heavy breathing the only sound left in the room. No telemetry printouts. No simulators. Just raw tension and shattered trust. And then came the death knell. "We're done. Consider this the beginning of the end. The board has already seen enough. You'll be hearing from legal this week. You want the truth? Here it is, you're not fit to drive for Ferrari." Vasseur didn't blink. He didn't waver. This wasn't a warning. It was a decision. And it wasn't just about performance or results. It was about culture, identity, respect. And Lewis had crossed a line too many. Hamilton, stunned into silence, looked away briefly, as if searching for a hidden camera, for any sign that this might be some cruel mind game, a tactic to spark a reaction, to reignite the fire. But no. This was real. The man who had once personally convinced him to wear red, to carry on the legacy of Schumacher, of Lauda, of Villeneuve, was now telling him he was done. There was no negotiation left. No last chance. No "we believe in you." Just cold, clinical termination. The silence grew even louder. Behind closed doors, this was the kind of moment that doesn't make it into Netflix documentaries. The kind of moment the media doesn't get wind of until months later, if ever. But this wasn't drama for the cameras. This was a seismic shift. An earthquake beneath the red walls of Maranello. And the aftershocks would be felt across the paddock. Hamilton slowly exhaled, his eyes narrowing. Not in defeat. Not yet. But in something darker. Something deeper. His ego bruised. His pride scorched. His legacy under threat. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this. Not by team bosses. Not by anyone. And Vasseur knew it. That's why he did it. Because this wasn't about Lewis Hamilton, the 7-time world champion. This was about Ferrari. And Ferrari was bleeding. Too many missed opportunities. Too many botched strategies. Too many radio calls filled with excuses instead of execution. And while Leclerc was rallying, fighting, clawing every tenth, Hamilton had become, at least in Vasseur's eyes, a shadow. A PR machine. A name on a fire suit. But not a leader. And Ferrari, for all its drama and dysfunction, needed a leader. Not a legend. A leader. The door to the office remained shut. Outside, the Italian sun burned bright. The mechanics worked on next week's upgrades. The media prepared their sound bites for Zandvoort. But inside, two giants stood in a silent storm, a volcano moments after eruption. Vasseur sat back down, eyes never leaving Hamilton. "You think this is personal?" he asked, his voice softer now but no less sharp. "It's not. It's surgical. It's survival. We gave you everything. You gave us complaints. You were supposed to inspire this team. But you walked in expecting a dynasty. We needed a warrior. You gave us a ghost." Hamilton took a step forward, slowly, as if trying to regain control of the moment. "You think I'm done?" he said, voice low and steady, almost a whisper. Vasseur didn't flinch. "No. I think we're done. Whether you're done, that's up to you." Hamilton's lips tightened. His eyes flickered with something ancient, resentment, defiance, hunger. Whatever it was, it burned. But it was too late. The damage was done. And Ferrari had made up its mind. The board, ever elusive and rarely vocal, had apparently pulled the trigger behind closed doors. Legal was already drafting documents. Transition plans were underway. Rumors would soon swirl like vultures over a battlefield. Alonso to Ferrari? Norris? Another Leclerc-centric team order disaster waiting to happen? Who cared? For now, the most decorated driver in the modern era had just been told, in no uncertain terms, that he no longer belonged. Not in red. Not in Maranello. Not in this chapter of Formula One. He turned slowly, his mind racing faster than any SF-75 ever could. Would he fight this? Leak it? Spin it into a redemption arc? Or would he walk? Let the silence say it all? One thing was clear, Lewis Hamilton may still be in Formula One, but this was the moment Ferrari stopped being his home. And for the first time in a very long time, Ferrari chose war over nostalgia. And Hamilton? He had just been drafted into a battle he never expected to fight. But one that, in true Hamilton fashion, he might just be ready to win. And with that final sharp and coldly delivered sentence, he turned his back and walked away, his steps firm, deliberate, filled with a kind of detachment that cuts deeper than shouting ever could. The echo of his shoes on the polished floor seemed to stretch endlessly in the silence that followed, each step distancing him further not just physically, but emotionally, until he vanished behind the corner, out of sight, out of reach. Lewis didn't move. He stood frozen, rooted in place as if gravity had suddenly multiplied. His gaze dropped, unfocused, his breathing shallow, heart pounding like a dull, broken drum. The words still hung in the air, invisible but suffocating, clinging to him like a second skin. They weren't loud, but they echoed inside his skull, ricocheting off memories, hopes, frustrations, and that ever-flickering doubt that gnawed at him since the season began. The weight of that brief exchange collapsed onto his chest with crushing force. He was used to pressure, but this was different. This wasn't a race. This was personal. And it hurt in a way no crash or defeat ever had. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Reporters swarmed like hornets, desperate for quotes and sound bites. Cameras clicked, questions flew, and microphones hovered, but Lewis gave them nothing, no headline, no drama, just quiet nods and one-word answers. In the team debrief, he spoke little. Eyes down. Shoulders tight. He felt the undercurrent of tension in the room, the glances exchanged when they thought he wasn't looking, the subtle shift in tone when he did speak. He wasn't paranoid, he could feel it. The shift. The cooling. By the time the paddock lights dimmed and the motorhome emptied, the storm had passed, at least on the surface. But inside he was still drowning. Long past midnight, long after the espresso machines had gone silent and the engineers had retreated to their hotel rooms, Charles Leclerc returned. He hadn't meant to. He'd gone out, answered the press, taken photos with fans, eaten dinner with the mechanics. But something had been nagging at him all evening. A strange silence in the background of the chaos. A presence that felt suddenly too absent. As he walked through the darkened motorhome, he saw a dim glow in the far corner. A figure hunched over. Still. Quiet. Hood up. Head down. Headphones on. Lewis. Alone. The sight struck Charles in a way he hadn't expected. He hesitated. This wasn't a moment for grand speeches or shallow comfort. But walking away felt wrong. So he walked toward him slowly, quietly, not wanting to startle him. He stopped just short, then slowly sat down on the bench beside him. Close enough to be present. Not so close as to invade. "I heard what happened," Charles said softly, his voice barely more than a whisper in the cavernous stillness. Lewis didn't move. Didn't flinch. Didn't acknowledge him. "It doesn't matter," he muttered after a beat, voice distant, worn thin. Charles frowned, eyes searching his teammate's face beneath the hood, reading the fatigue in his features, the battle going on behind those eyes. "It does matter," he said, firmer now, yet still gentle. He was completely out of line. No one talks to a teammate like that. No one talks to you like that. There was another long pause. Lewis slowly took off his headphones, letting them rest in his lap, and turned his head slightly to finally look at Charles. His eyes weren't angry, they were just tired. Haunted. Weary in a way that no amount of rest could fix. "I'm not an idiot, Charles," he said quietly, but not bitterly. "I can read the data. I see what's happening. You're faster. More consistent. You're getting more out of the car. I know what people are saying. I'm the one dragging the team down." "That's not true," Charles replied instantly, almost too fast. "It is," Lewis continued, shaking his head. "And I'm not even mad about it. I don't feel it. This car. It doesn't respond to me. It doesn't talk to me. Every time I push, it pulls away. Every corner feels like guesswork. It's like it's punishing me for every instinct I've ever trusted. I don't know how to drive it without doubting myself." Charles leaned back, exhaling slowly. He didn't interrupt. He let the silence settle for a second, let the words breathe. "You're not the only one," he finally said, voice calm. "This car is a wild animal. It snaps at you if you get too close. And sometimes it just decides not to obey. I've had to wrestle it every weekend since it was born. And yeah, maybe I make it look easier. But that's because I've been dancing with this beast for 3 years. I know when it bites. You've had 3 months. That's not a fair fight." Lewis looked at him again, this time more directly, searching his face for any hint of pity, but there was none. Only sincerity. "And besides," Charles continued, leaning forward, elbows on his knees, "I've seen what you can do. We all have. I grew up watching you win races that should have been impossible. Watching you drive cars that had no business on the podium. You haven't forgotten how to race. You just haven't learned how this one wants to be raced. There's a difference." Lewis gave a dry chuckle, more an exhale than a laugh. "You're wise for your age, Leclerc." Charles smirked. "You sound like you're retiring tomorrow." "I'm not. I thought this would be different. I thought I'd come in, bring my experience, help lift the team, help win again. And instead, I feel like a passenger in my own career." Charles didn't respond immediately. He let the moment sit between them like a delicate glass that could shatter if handled carelessly. "You still can," he said finally. "But not by trying to make the car something it's not. You have to let go of what worked before. This machine, it doesn't care about legacy. It only responds to surrender." Lewis raised an eyebrow. "You sound like a monk." "Maybe I've been spending too much time alone in hotel rooms," Charles smiled. They both sat in silence for a while, not awkward, but reflective. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the canvas awnings of the team tents. A couple of night shift mechanics walked past without noticing them. Lewis looked down at his hands. Hands that had held 7 world championships. Hands that had lifted trophies across every continent. Hands that now trembled not with fear, but with frustration. "I don't want to go out like this," he said quietly. "Not lost. Not misunderstood." Charles nodded. "Then don't." And with that, he stood. Gave Lewis a pat on the back. No lecture. No pep talk. Just presence. As he walked away, Lewis remained seated, but something in his posture shifted. Just slightly. A breath deeper. Shoulders a little looser. Not a transformation, but maybe the beginning of one. And for the first time all evening, he didn't feel entirely alone.